live on YouTube. All right, sorry y'all, you're seeing the countdown of when we go live. For those on audio, I'm just making sure this is streamed on YouTube for accessibility. All right. All right, I think we're live on YouTube, so I'm just going to share that with a couple of folks so they have access to this presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. Thanks for your patience, y'all. Alrighty, well, I won't put any further ado and we can go ahead and get started. And for folks watching on the YouTube, if anyone in the chat could just let me know, make sure that they could see our interpreter, Katie, okay? That would be fantastic. Well, I won't put any further ado. Oh, there's a lag, sorry. All right, here we go. All right, so hi everyone. My name is Jalyn Radziminski. I'm the founder and president of Count Us In. And today I'm really excited to talk to y'all about a hashtag I made when I was a fellow with the American Association of People with Disabilities with the Fanny Lou Hamer leadership cohort. And I'm excited to talk about the intersections of essentially being Black and living with a disability and how we can take this intersectional lens to make sure that all of our organizing and advocacy efforts include us. And just a little background, I'm doing this through Count Us In today for March to End the Madness. So thank you all for having me in this space. Essentially, Count Us In, we are Indiana's first nonpartisan nonprofit and movement, and our mission is to uplift the voice of citizens and foster more inclusive and equitable political participation and more diverse voter turnout. We seek to educate, empower the community, as well as show that we have voices and they matter. And we typically work with communities that have historically been suppressed and oppressed from the vote. So Black, Latinx, Asian, Native American, LGBT+, those in poverty, those with disability, etc. We just make sure that their voices and their experiences are heard and that they can have the tools they need to make an impact. So that's just a quick part about Count Us In. And to center this conversation, especially because this is about Blackness, living with a disability and accessibility, I wanted to first talk about the life of Fanny Lou Hamer. She's a big inspiration. Her legacy is a big inspiration for me. For those who are listening on audio, I have an image of Fanny Lou Hamer with her fist raised, speaking in front of a crowd. And I have the quote displayed that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I felt that a lot this week. I'm sure a lot of y'all who organize and do different types of heavy lifting work can relate to that too, that essentially we're tired of being tired. And I chose this quote and I chose to spotlight Fanny Lou Hamer because she was Black, she lived with disabilities, she was impacted in incarceration, and she was a strong leader in the civil rights movement. She created her own political party. She was actually arrested by helping Black people be able to vote. She led women's rights movements, civil rights movements, and she actually did a lot to help those in poverty. So I really wanted to center this essentially in her legacy today, because, count us in, we do a lot for political participation and voting, but I also really emphasize that we continuously fight for our communities by any means possible because our voices, our well being, and our lives matter, not just for voting seasons or political campaigns, but 365 days of the year. So, for those of y'all out there marching today, thank you for making sure that people are listening year round. So, and just to kind of go a little bit deeper, I like to take an integrated civic engagement approach. So, similar to how Fanny Lou Hamer, she did a lot of grassroots organizing, voter engagement, and protesting. I like to take a similar integrated approach. And this was actually inspired by Alexis Anderson Reed that she wrote when she worked with State Voices, which essentially means civic engagement is an ecosystem and interconnected. And I'm building up to this before I get deep into the accessibility content, and you'll start to see why. But essentially, integrated civic engagement, you can't tell people to vote, 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 or I don't know, track legislation or run for office, things like that to represent us if people are trying to eat, people are trying to find housing, people are experiencing discrimination or feeling disillusioned by these systems that historically have suppressed Black, disability, and other BIPOC and historically marginalized communities. So when I say integrated civic engagement, I mean making sure there's mutual aid, so that people have access to food and other items of need, making sure that, if they do want to vote, that their votes aren't suppressed, validating that protest is a means to be heard, petitions, making sure people have access to different educational resources, that people understand legislation that's impacting their lives. I see them as all interconnected with each other. So I wanted to kind of talk about that approach to kind of show that no matter how you engage in social justice, that you are playing a role in this ecosystem to make change and to ensure that our voices and our needs are heard. And to continue to build off of that, oh, sorry, y'all. Let me fix my slide real quick. There we go. For those who are seeing this visually. So to kind of build off of that more, I know a lot of people play different roles individually in the social change ecosystem. So for some people who are listening, some people who are tuning in visually, before going deep into this material, I want to affirm that there are different ways that we can individually contribute to supporting the fight for justice in this big ecosystem that we live in, right? So we have people who are bridge builders, healers, disruptors, visionaries, caregivers, frontline responders, and artists. Where does the frontline responder go when they need to heal? The healer. Where does this disruptor go when they need the right person to make them the connection they need to take action? The bridge builder. I just emphasize this to say and validate that wherever you all find yourselves now, and even if it changes, and I typically see it does change in the future, how you feel you're most comfortable and able to advocate, that's valid and okay. For me personally, I used to tend to be more on the frontline responder and disruptor space. And as I've gotten a little bit older and my legs can't quite march as long as I used to be able to, I find myself more in the visionary bridge building and healing space, which is also, I found a very great role to play to support those that march and do other types of social change engagement. So I always like to set it up that way to just validate people and wherever they see themselves advocating individually and just what spaces they find themselves in, that you're valid and it's connected. And of course, for those visually, again, I'm going to be talking about accessibility from an intersectional perspective, So as I'm talking through these things, please think about how different ties to power and privilege play in regards to race, disability, of course, but of course, housing, language, gender, sexuality, uh, access to education and wealth. I really want to emphasize that I'm going to be looking at this from this framework because as a Black Lives Matter activist, Janaea Khan always says, we love how we organize. And I always like to acknowledge the different types of organizing and identities to show that you are loved. And that I make sure I always organize in a way to show that I love all of my communities. And I also have a quote on here by Audre Lorde that says, there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issues lives. So I know those listening see so many different struggles, and I'm here to say there is a lot of ways where, although different oppression cannot be compared, you'll start to see that certain agendas addressing the system can benefit a lot, if not all of us. So, going into centering Black disability freedom and accessibility, and at least what I conceptualize at that, I like to start, with the foundation of the disability rights movement. So, of course, we've had, racial justice, gender, disability rights activists, they work together historically to fight for the basic civil rights we have today. Of course, they are not perfect and they don't address everything, but I like to kind of show and just talk about the framework that we have and as we conceptualize what we should do to move forward. And when I talk about Black disability freedom, I like to bring up Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson. So for those of you who are able to see my screen, Lois Curtis, she's a Black woman wearing a red dress, and Elaine Wilson, she's wearing like a off pink magenta coat, and they're walking together in the street. And these two women are very important figures because in Georgia, they were part of the historic Olmstead case, which laid a massive framework in the American Disability Act to make sure that they're included in, people with disabilities are included in civil rights. And what's I find very significant about them is these are two women, one is white, one is Black, and they both lived with mental health and intellectual disabilities. And the outcome of their case actually laid the framework where state-funded community-based support outside of incarceral institutions became a right. And I think that's so important to think about because when you look at disability rights, oftentimes in disability representation, it's often centered in whiteness. It's often centered showcasing white male cisgender people with disabilities, which of course these acts support those communities too. But I also like to remind people that a Black woman was also pivotal for our civil rights as well in the disability community so that we can restore that memory. And I also like to bring up these two because so many disability rights movements, we want community-based care, integration. In today's society, you see a lot of segregation still. And you see a lot of people trying to create parent-like models. And there's a lot of movements from people with lived experiences that want to be integrated in society and to be accepted the way that they are without those stigmas. And what's very powerful with these two women also is that because they live with mental health and intellectual disabilities, those are disabilities that aren't always visible. And I find that important to remind people interested in Black liberation and disability justice that, not all disabilities are visible so that we can come at organizing and advocacy in a way that's compassionate and accessible. And to talk a little bit more, for those listening in, I just have a couple of facts displayed here. So if you're on YouTube, you can see it, or Zoom, but if you're listening, I'm going to make sure to do image descriptions for all of these. So I have a graphic here that says 25.6% of adults in the United States have some type of disability. And in Indiana, 25.5% of adults in Indiana live with some type of disability. So that means we, in a sense of disability, essentially in the United States and in Indiana specifically, our state, about 1 out of 4 people live with a disability. That's a significant number in our population, and again, not all disabilities are visible. So I'm sure there may be people listening in the audience as well. This is, for you to show, and also for those who are interested in allyship to understand that we are a significant population, especially Black people with disabilities as well, to pay attention to and advocate for. And to further dig into that, Black people with disabilities are more likely to die in prison and congregate settings. I can speak more on that later, but essentially the Black Lives Matter movement, Black Disabled Lives Matter movement, many movements have intersections with people with disabilities. And in fact, a lot of the advocacy revolved around Black Lives Matter was people with disabilities that died due to police brutality. So I always like to emphasize that, as well as when in prison, we are more likely to die, especially with COVID. And again, I don't think I said this exact number for those who are listening in, but half of the police killings are of disabled community members. So that's really important to note there. And I know for for March to End the Madness, a lot of the focus is on addressing poverty and helping those that are unhoused. Disabled people are disproportionately homeless, and formerly incarcerated people are 10 times more likely to be homeless. So a lot of the communities that we're serving, I really am grateful to present for you all today, because this can maybe help us get deeper into the different nuances in the communities that we're fighting so hard to support and serve. All right, so I'm going to go into accessibility 101 is what I called this slide for those listening in. And those are essentially different tools and strategies that I wanted to explain today, in hopes that it could be helpful in your movements and just your everyday lives, essentially, to make it more accessible for people. So one note that I put is, when you're looking to make your movements or any initiative more accessible, always be sure to add image descriptions and video captions as a standard. So for you all listening today that aren't able to watch on YouTube or Zoom, this is actually a good simulation. So throughout my presentation, you probably heard me describe what is on my PowerPoint slides. As you can see, I hope that at least helps you all imagine and know what I'm visually what I'm talking about. So image descriptions when presenting can also be helpful too, but also when you post on social media, as well as when there's videos. Especially if you do not have access to an ASL interpreter, it's always best practice to just always add captioning, so that people viewing the video can see what the message is, essentially. And for those who are watching on Zoom and on YouTube, you probably see I have captions at the bottom of the screen as well. That actually helps a lot of different communities be able to follow in a more accessible manner. And a deeper pro tip is, if you can get captioning on your Zoom when you present, it's really nice for note taking as well. For those who need notes, you can pull the transcript and give people the conversation. I mean, maybe you want to edit it, maybe not, but I found that very useful for accessibility and just other manners to spread the resources in a more accessible manner. The other tip is to make sure you budget and schedule interpreters at events. So I'm really grateful that I know to always book an ASL interpreter for my events and always make sure that I have captioning on my Zooms. This is a very big deal because when you get in more conversation with different disability communities, sometimes the community won't come if they just, because a lot of times the assumption is the interpretation won't be there, and of course, why would you come if you don't have anyone to interpret for you? So it's just a commitment to the community as well, where if you have someone in your audience or if you're trying to reach a specific community, make sure that it's an accessible space so they feel welcome, or at least put a blurb that you can make those accommodations and reach those accessibility needs, so they can attend and fully participate. Besides budgeting and scheduling interpreters, spread information format screen readers can access. I tend to try to send things in PDF and Word, just because different screen readers seem to prefer different formats. So often those who are blind or limited vision, they have screen readers actually help read documents and computer screens for them. So that kind of goes back to image descriptions. Any image you put, anything you write, just making sure it's in different formats. For this PowerPoint, actually, when I put any image in it, I put in the note box a description of the image I even put in my PowerPoint. So if I were to send it to people listening today, they can have, if someone needs a screen reader, they can actually get that description as well. For protests, I always suggest places for rest and accessible locations. I saw a beautiful example for those who are organized in the Black Disabled Lives Matter movement. You could see that they made sure there was space for those in wheelchairs, there was space to rest. And just historically protesting in the disability community, we think about each other. So it's just kind of, if you just do it to a point it's habit, it becomes second nature. And then again, if you're organizing an event, make sure to provide a contact person and their information so that people who may need reasonable accommodations have someone that they can reach out to. And this is applicable in protesting, advocacy, organizing, even the workplace, y'all. A lot of this stuff can be applied literally anywhere or just your everyday life. Accepting different means to engage. Some people like audio, some people like visual, some people engage in different ways, and just making sure that's validated and okay. I always encourage people to be flexible and open-minded, because what's also important to emphasize is even though people may have a similar disability, maybe they navigate the world in a different way where they may need a different accommodation. So I always tell people have different needs. We're individuals, and it's just better to, if the individual is seeking help or accommodations, ask them what they want best. Don't assume just because maybe you worked with someone with that disability before, or maybe you read about it. Just talking to that individual, they may have a preference that you can't read minds. So that's a point I always like to make. And just thinking about our communities year round. I made that point with the Fanny Lou Hamer slide that, our lives matter 365 days of the year. And just if you are accessible consistently, again, it creates habit and calls more community members in and makes them feel appreciated as you're advocating. And just essentially just it helps open up movements to them as well. And of course, Black and disability communities, we have our own movements. So maybe even getting familiar with that culture, you can learn how to support in those spaces as well. So, just to talk a little bit, I wanted to highlight some things that the disability community has been fighting for. Um, for those who are able to see the screen, I just have a list of different bills and acts that have passed, didn't pass, um, so far this legislative session in Indiana. Um, wanted to highlight housing rights. Um, so, for example, under housing rights, I wrote about SEA 148, the eviction bill. A lot of people in disability communities fought to stop this. Essentially, what this bill did was stripped tenants of their rights in ways in which the renters, the landlords don't tell the renters their rights. It limits safety inspections for homes people try to rent. It increases different types of emergency possession if people are kicked out of their home. I just thought that would be a very relevant bill to show that the disability community has been fighting to protect their rights for housing, and essentially that's an intersectional piece. I think March to End the Madness and other movements could definitely see eye to eye on how to address that in the agenda. Unfortunately, that did pass despite so much fighting. So now a lot of disability community are working very hard to add protections and amendments via other bills so that tenants can get some of their basic rights recovered after that. Policing, again, like I noted before, that Black people and people with disabilities are more likely to be incarcerated, to die at the hands of police, and to die while incarcerated. And I know many people know about qualified immunity, and if not, that qualified immunity is a long, ongoing debate of um, essentially police officers getting, when they do things on the job, they can get different immunity protections so they can't be sued in many cases. If someone dies at the hands of police, it can become up for debate of if they're protected under qualified immunity. And in many circumstances, they are. And it's devastating to families and community members that they are treated at a standard that's different than everyday citizens. Um, so that being said, many Black and disability communities are paying attention to this because in Indiana right now, there is a push to enhance qualified immunity, and it directly contradicts other acts such as the Justice and Policing Act that was created after George Floyd. Um, there's also House Bill 1006, which is a win. I wanted to share y'all some wins as well. Um, Essentially, it holds law enforcement officers accountable for mandatory de-escalation training in their curriculum. Um, Also, just more transparency on misconduct. So as you can see, these bills are very different than each other, but luckily, the bill to create more de-escalation training and how it defines and prohibits chokeholds passing locally, that is a win, but obviously, because I just referenced qualified immunity, that's not enough. Um, so the fight continues there, and just other healthcare and disability issues that the community has been fighting for. As you all know, COVID-19 is dangerous. I'm glad y'all are all either at home or masked up and outside meeting today. Essentially, like the bills I mentioned before, how safe would you feel going into a legislative office when wearing masks aren't enforced? If you live with a disability, or you just simply don't want to take the risk. A lot of disability community has been pushing very hard so that they can tune in via Zoom or other digital manners to communicate and give public testimony during meetings. And unfortunately, it's been a difficult struggle. So the only progress that has been made so far is there's consideration that organizations led by 51% or more board members that have disabilities could gain access to testify and electronically communicate on behalf of their communities at public meetings. And for those who don't know, public meetings are supposed to have an open door law. They're supposed to be accessible to the community. So this bill is very critical because for community members to not have that access, it's quite an issue. And I know a lot of members in the deaf community advocated to make sure there's closed captioning on all public TV stations, which I'm sure if all of you figured out by now, Netflix, Hulu, any type of TV you watch, there is a button you just hit real quick so subtitles can come on your TV. But unfortunately, that bill was killed by a business lobby. So that's just, some intersectional issues related to housing, policing, healthcare, and disability that I just wanted to show those intersections. I hope maybe we could figure out a way to do questions, and to share the resources afterward, but there's a lot more. This is only a sample of just the disability community fighting for access to COVID-19 vaccinations, crisis care, stopping racial profiling, community-based services, and just so much more. So just some ideas, because some of you are probably listening or watching and thinking, okay, like I want to do this, but I don't have a lot of money. So I just wanted to show some free ways where you can start taking some steps now. So for captioning on videos, okay, sweet. And I just saw in the chat that we have volunteer that could pass the phone around for questions. So that's lovely. Sorry. So, okay, again, so for captioning of videos, an app I like to highlight is called Mixed Captions, Video Captions. And for those who are listening, it's just a screenshot of the app. I can give you all the PowerPoint afterward, where essentially what you do is you record a video. And when you record your video, normal, just however you would normally do it on your phone, you just put the video in the app. And what's really nice is the app will automatically generate the subtitles for you. So it's very helpful when you want to spread important information to spread to the community so that more people can access it. And what's nice is, I know when I downloaded this app, I actually got a couple minutes for free when I first downloaded it. And then when it came to paying, because I know a lot of us don't like to pay for apps, it was $5 for like a year worth of transcriptions. So I just put this to say, if you're recording material on your phone, I know a lot of us as activists, we do that. We want to get the word out. That is a really quick, cheap way where that can take you a long way if you're just short on a budget. If you check out Countess Indiana's Instagram, all the captions you see are actually through this app. So you don't have to be rich to do this. And then just another tip with image description. So for instance, for this virtual workshop itself, on any social media platform, Facebook, Insta, Twitter, there's usually a way where you can add alternative text. And I'll say, just from my personal experience working with communities, it's always nice to have a very nice descriptive, a nice description for images you post. So what I'm showing here is a screenshot of the Black Disability Freedom Flyer from Facebook. And I'm showing you the back end of my nonprofit's Facebook right now. When you click on the dots in the top right corner of Facebook, you'll see an option to change the alternative text. For those who don't know, Facebook automatically generates alt text for images. But a lot of people in the community that depend on screen readers will tell you they're crappy most of the time. So it's usually better to just like take the image description and write your own. it's usually more fun and more engaging, but it also just makes more sense. Because again, Facebook image descriptions aren't that good. So I just kind of have a screenshot here showing the difference of the different typos you're going to see in the Facebook auto-generated one, because it's essentially trying to take the images from your picture and it's not accurate, and take words from the picture and it's not accurate. It's a very similar process to LinkedIn as well, if you use LinkedIn, but I always complain about it because the character limits for image descriptions is shorter. And then you could do this on Twitter as well. What's really nice with Twitter too, actually, is as you all who use Twitter, I know a lot of you do, there's a limited amount of space you can type words and tweet. So I know some people post the image description manually in your post. That's not quite as easy on Twitter. So I always use the alternative text or image descriptions to describe that as well. And that actually helps me communicate more information per tweet. When you upload a photo on Twitter, you'll see the add the description box. So, and for those listening in, all I have is a screenshot of Twitter. So if you're just sitting listening, maybe you want to play around on your phone, and you'll see different ways to add alt text. I forgot to put one of Instagram, but when you go on Instagram and you post your photo, before you post it, if you scroll down, there's an accessibility arrow. When you hit that, you'll be prompted to put an image description on Instagram as well. Okay, so that's the main things I wanted to share. I'm going to distribute this PowerPoint and resources because some of you may be listening and thinking, okay, let me download these apps to make things more accessible, or like, oh my gosh, that legislation sucks. What can I do after the march? I'm just giving y'all some suggestions, no pressure. But in regards to disability rights and healthcare rights, a lot of people with disabilities are fighting to have access to the vaccine. It actually still blows many of our minds that people with disabilities are at high risk for coronavirus, yet it's only recently that we started to be added to lists in addition to the elderly to get access to the vaccine. So if you follow the hashtag high risk Indiana, you'll see a lot of that. And on my PowerPoint, I just have a flyer, and I'll share this with you all afterward, that says, high risk Indiana, why are we expendable? All Hoosiers with disabilities are still not eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. So as you're doing this work, this is important to advocate for, because we need access to the vaccine. That's just basic needs and rights. And you'll probably see in your organizing work, if you do things to support individuals impacted by incarceration or other congregate or other known as crowded settings. This is so important. There's focus groups. So Countess in my organization, we're actually working with different grassroots organizations to ensure that the things that we march and protest for are heard by candidates running for office, representatives, as well as via legislation. Of course, we need the right people in office to hear these things, but we're creating an initiative now to create more accountability and transparency to show how the different things we are fighting for are interconnected. So if people are interested in that, I'll share this PowerPoint after the presentation, but we will meet next Tuesday, March 23rd at 6 p.m. So feel free to reach out to me as we're addressing these issues. And I think finally, economic impact payments. I wanted to show this and / explain it to those listening as well. And I know a lot of you all work directly with the community that doesn't have housing or is just, fighting against poverty. As y'all know, the stimulus checks have been released, and a lot of people don't think about those with disabilities, those homeless to making sure they get access to that $1,400 stimulus check. So you don't need a house to get this check. There's actually a way where you can get, if you visit um, the nearest IRS, Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Office, it's free to do. You can go and help someone get an appointment or tell someone where they can get an appointment so that they can file their taxes electronically. I'm sure that's probably a quick process. And they can get support there so that they can directly receive those payments, because I mean, stimulus checks, they help us, but imagine that can help someone who is maybe battling with poverty or not having a house. That could be a big support as well. People don't even need a bank account to do this, and they don't have to make a bank account to do this. There's actually a way where you can get it done on a stimulus card, where they would actually have the card, and you don't need to have an address again for this. You can list a local post office, a mailbox, homeless shelter, a religious place. There's so many ways to help get this resource to the community. And I wanted to share that and just put it on people's radars as well on the ground. But that's all. I'm gonna stop. I've actually never spoken for 40 minutes straight before. Thank you, Katie, for interpreting. I know there's been little breaks, but I have my name and email displayed, but I just want to stop here to leave plenty of time for questions and discussions. So yeah, thank y'all so much.